Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're viewing from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1938, when the winds whipped through the valleys of western Massachusetts and scattered crimson leaves across frost-bitten grounds, Thomas Merritt, his wife Eleanor, and their 19-year-old son James moved into a stately colonial revival home in the quiet township of Hastings Mills. The house, built in 1900, stood proudly at number 17 Willow Street, its white clapboard exterior and symmetrical windows reflecting the renewed interest in America's colonial heritage. According to town records, the Merritt family had purchased the property from the estate of Albert Harrington, a once prominent banker who had owned the house since 1921, though he had spent little time there in his final years. What drew the family to this particular house was its dignified presence on the tree-lined street and the notably low asking price, a consequence of the lingering effects of the Great Depression. Thomas Merritt, a professor of American history at the nearby college, had always admired the colonial revival style for its embodiment of traditional American values. The center entry, with its small Doric columns supporting a modest portico, the symmetrically placed 6-over-6 sash windows, flanked by functional shutters with their distinctive cutouts, and the gambrel roof with 3 evenly spaced dormers, all appealed to his sensibilities. A report published in the Hastings Mills Gazette on October 4, 1938, briefly mentioned the sale of the Harrington property to a respected academic from Boston seeking the tranquility of our scenic township. The article further noted that the house had been meticulously maintained by the caretaker, despite standing largely vacant since Mr. Harrington relocated to his city residence some years ago. This caretaker, a local man by the name of Walter Jenkins, had apparently served the Harrington family for nearly 2 decades, maintaining the house in the owner's prolonged absences. What the newspaper failed to report, however, was the curious reluctance Walter Jenkins displayed when handing over the house keys to Thomas Merritt. According to Eleanor Merritt's correspondence with her sister in Springfield, the caretaker had appeared uncommonly anxious about the basement in particular. The peculiar man insisted we need not concern ourselves with the cellar space, she wrote in a letter dated October 10th. He assured us the coal deliveries would be managed through the exterior bulkhead, and he would personally attend to the furnace as part of his continued service. Thomas, however, politely declined this arrangement, stating that he preferred to manage his own household entirely. The basement of the Merritt house was typical of New England homes of its era, a full basement with stone foundation walls and a concrete floor installed sometime in the 1920s as a modern improvement. A central coal furnace dominated the space, with a laundry area containing a large soapstone sink positioned near the bulkhead entrance. Coal bins lined one wall, while the remaining space served as storage for preserved foods and household items. What differentiated this basement from others in the neighborhood, as the Merritts would soon discover, was a peculiarity in its dimensions. According to James Merritt's journal, which was discovered in 1969 during a public library donation drive, the family's first 2 weeks in the house passed without incident. They established their routines, Thomas arranging his study with books and papers, Eleanor organizing the kitchen and parlor spaces, and James settling into his room in preparation for his eventual return to college after helping his parents relocate. "The house has a dignified bearing," James wrote, "though at times I sense an unsettling heaviness to its silence, particularly in the evening hours when Father's reading lamp casts long shadows through the parlor." On October 27th, during an unusually heavy rainstorm, the first anomaly appeared. Water began to seep into one corner of the basement, prompting Thomas to investigate the foundation in that area. It was while moving several stacked crates away from the wall that he first noticed the inconsistency. According to his own account, later documented in a statement to a local historian in 1945, the exterior dimensions of the house did not correspond with the interior space of the basement. The north wall appeared to be approximately 8 feet shy of where mathematical logic suggested it should be. This discrepancy might have been dismissed as a simple error in Thomas's calculations had it not been for the strange behavior of Walter Jenkins upon being questioned about it. When Thomas casually mentioned the apparent dimensional irregularity during the caretaker's weekly visit, the man reportedly became flustered. According to Eleanor's testimony, Jenkins insisted that old houses settled in peculiar ways, and that the foundation walls likely weren't perfectly square to begin with. This explanation, while plausible, did not satisfy Thomas's academic curiosity. The following day, Thomas borrowed a tape measure from his colleague at the college and meticulously measured both the exterior perimeter of the house and the interior dimensions of each room, including the basement. His findings confirmed his suspicion. There was indeed a discrepancy of approximately 8 feet between the exterior north wall and the apparent interior wall of the basement. This space, roughly 8 feet by 20 feet, appeared to exist as an architectural impossibility, a room that should be there, but wasn't. James's journal entry from November 2nd described what happened next. Father has become consumed with the measurement discrepancy. Today he examined every inch of the north basement wall, tapping with his knuckles and pressing against the rough stonework. Mother watches with a mixture of amusement and concern. She believes it is merely an old coal chute or some architectural quirk common to houses of this vintage, but Father insists something is amiss. The wall does sound different in certain sections, hollower somehow. On November 5th, a Saturday afternoon when Eleanor had gone to visit a neighbor, Thomas and James conducted a more thorough investigation of the basement wall. Using a small hammer, Thomas tapped methodically along the stonework until, near the northeast corner, they detected a distinctly different sound, not the solid thud of stone against earth, but a resonant emptiness behind the surface. According to James's account, his father then noticed something unusual about the mortar in that section. The material between several stones appeared different in color and texture from the surrounding areas, he wrote, as if it had been replaced or repaired at some point, though with an attempt to match the original. After several hours of careful examination, Thomas identified what appeared to be a deliberate pattern to the differently mortared stones. A roughly door-shaped outline approximately 6 feet high and 3 feet wide. The discovery invigorated him. Using a chisel borrowed from the garden shed, he began to carefully chip away at the mortar surrounding one of the stones in the pattern. According to James, his father worked with the meticulous precision of an archaeologist, removing one small section of mortar at a time, until, finally, he was able to loosen and remove a single stone, roughly the size of a bread loaf. James described what happened next with palpable tension. Father removed the stone and set it aside. We then peered through the opening, but the darkness beyond was absolute. Father retrieved his electric torch from upstairs and, upon his return, directed its beam through the gap. The light revealed not solid earth, as one might expect against a foundation wall, but empty space, a void extending beyond the reach of the torch's beam. The air that wafted through the opening carried a peculiar staleness, like the musty interior of an ancient trunk long sealed against the elements. Energized by this confirmation, Thomas and James worked more quickly, removing additional stones until they had created an opening large enough for a person to crawl through. According to James's journal, his father insisted on being the first to enter. I helped Father climb through the opening, he wrote, handing him the torch once he was inside. For several moments I could see only the bobbing beam of light and hear his footsteps echoing in what was clearly a sizable space. Then the light steadied, and I heard Father's voice, oddly muffled. "James, you need to see this." "Ah, sus bite." What Thomas Merritt discovered that November afternoon was a room that by all architectural logic should not have existed, a hidden chamber measuring approximately 8 feet wide by 20 feet long, with a ceiling height of about 7 feet. The space had been deliberately sealed off from the main basement, concealed behind what appeared to be the original foundation wall, yet it was undeniably part of the house's structure. According to James's detailed description, the room contained no windows and no apparent exterior entrance. The only access was through the opening they had created. Most notably, unlike the rough stone walls of the main basement, this hidden room had been finished with wooden panels on all surfaces, walls, floor, and ceiling, creating a space that, while utilitarian, had clearly been designed for some form of occupation or use. In the beam of the flashlight, they could see that the room contained several items: a small desk against the far wall, 2 wooden chairs, a filing cabinet, and what appeared to be a radio set on a side table. A thick layer of dust covered everything, suggesting the space had remained untouched for years. Eleanor Merritt's reaction upon returning home and being shown the discovery was one of alarmed fascination. In a letter to her sister dated November 7th, she wrote, "The men have found something truly extraordinary in our basement. A room completely hidden from view, sealed behind the foundation wall, as if someone intended it never to be found." Thomas is absolutely captivated by the discovery, speculating it may have been used during Prohibition as a place to store illegal spirits, though there are no bottles or crates to be found. "I confess the whole thing makes me uneasy. Why would someone go to such lengths to conceal a room and then seal it so thoroughly without clearing its contents?" Urim. The discovery of the hidden room coincided with an unexpected development. Walter Jenkins failed to appear for his scheduled weekly visit on November 6th. When Thomas telephoned Jenkins's residence, there was no answer. A neighbor informed Thomas that Jenkins had apparently departed town suddenly, leaving a note stating a family emergency required his immediate attention out of state. This sudden disappearance, coming just a day after the discovery of the hidden room, struck the Merritts as suspiciously coincidental. In the absence of the caretaker, Thomas took it upon himself to further investigate both the hidden room and any information about the previous owner that might explain its existence. At the town hall, he requested access to the property records for 17 Willow Street, learning that Albert Harrington had purchased the house in 1921 from the estate of the original owner, Harold Winthrop, who had commissioned its construction at the turn of the century. What captured Thomas's attention, however, was a notation in the records indicating that Harrington had filed for significant structural repairs and renovations in 1924, though the specific nature of these changes was not detailed. This timing was significant, 1 year after the implementation of Prohibition, when many wealthy homeowners were creating hidden spaces to store and consume illegal alcohol. Thomas's theory that the room had served as a private speakeasy seemed increasingly plausible, yet several elements of the hidden room didn't align with the typical speakeasy arrangement. There were no alcohol containers, no bar setup, and the filing cabinet seemed an unusual feature for a drinking establishment. Moreover, the radio equipment appeared more sophisticated than standard commercial models of the era. According to James's journal entry from November 10th, his father had determined it to be a transmitter-receiver combination of considerable power and complexity, suggesting purposes beyond mere entertainment. Shortly, the following days saw Thomas and James cataloging the contents of the hidden room with methodical precision. The desk drawers yielded several notebooks filled with columns of numbers, dates, and what appeared to be coordinates, all written in a precise, angular hand. The filing cabinet contained folders organized by month and year, spanning from 1924 to 1936, each containing similar notations along with occasional newspaper clippings. Most intriguing was a leather-bound ledger found in the bottom drawer of the desk, its pages filled with names, some local to Hastings Mills, others from surrounding towns, and still others from as far away as Boston and New York. Eleanor's discomfort with the discovery continued to grow. In a letter to her sister dated November 15th, she wrote, "Thomas has become utterly absorbed in deciphering the materials from that dreadful hidden room. He sits up until the early morning hours, poring over the notebooks and ledgers, as if they contain the answer to some grand historical puzzle. James assists him with an enthusiasm that matches his father's. But I cannot shake the feeling that some things are hidden for good reason. The house feels different now, colder somehow, and I find myself startled by ordinary noises that never bothered me before." By mid-November, Thomas had developed a theory about the room's purpose. Based on the dates in the notebooks and the technical nature of the radio equipment, he believed Albert Harrington had been engaged in some form of covert communication during the Prohibition era. The ledger of names, he speculated, might be a record of clients or associates involved in bootlegging operations. This theory gained credence when he cross-referenced several of the names with local newspaper archives and discovered that at least 3 individuals listed had been investigated for alcohol trafficking between 1925 and 1929, though none had been convicted. What remained puzzling, however, was why such an operation would have continued until 1936, 3 years after Prohibition had ended. Moreover, the precise nature of the numerical notations defied simple explanation. They did not appear to be financial records or inventory lists, as one might expect from a bootlegging enterprise. According to James's journal, his father consulted discreetly with a colleague from the mathematics department, who suggested the numbers might be some form of code or cipher. The mystery deepened when James, while cleaning the radio equipment, discovered a false bottom in the transmitter unit. Hidden in this compartment was a small leather case containing several identification cards and official-looking documents, all bearing Albert Harrington's photograph but different names. Also included was a small silver key with an unusual notched pattern, unlike any standard house or cabinet key of the era. Meanwhile, Eleanor's unease had evolved into genuine distress. She reported hearing faint mechanical clicking sounds emanating from the basement at night, despite the radio equipment having no power connected to it. She also claimed that certain items in the house, photographs, books, and small decorative objects, appeared to have been moved slightly when no one was in the room. Thomas and James dismissed these concerns as the natural anxiety that often accompanies adjusting to a new home. But Eleanor was adamant that something had changed in the house since the opening of the hidden room. On November 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving, Thomas attempted to locate Albert Harrington, the former owner, to inquire directly about the hidden room. His inquiries led him to a luxurious apartment building in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, where Harrington reportedly resided. However, upon arrival, Thomas was informed by the building manager that Harrington had relocated to Washington, D.C. several months earlier, leaving no forwarding address. The manager described Harrington as a private man who entertained few visitors and maintained irregular hours, often absent for weeks or months at a time with no explanation. Returning to Hastings Mills, Thomas redirected his investigation toward the town's older residents who might have known Harrington during his residence there. Most recalled him as a distant figure who participated minimally in community affairs, despite his apparent wealth and position. One elderly shopkeeper, however, offered a more nuanced recollection. According to Thomas's notes found later among his papers, the shopkeeper remembered Harrington receiving unusual visitors, typically late in the evening, men in dark suits who arrived in expensive automobiles with out-of-state plates, typically staying only an hour or two before departing. The shopkeeper also recalled that these visits increased dramatically during 1931 and 1932, a period that coincided with heightened tensions in Europe and the rise of fascist regimes in Germany and Italy. This observation prompted Thomas to reconsider his initial bootlegging theory, wondering if perhaps Harrington's activities had been political rather than criminal in nature. By early December, Thomas had assembled enough evidence to form a new hypothesis. The radio equipment, the coded notations, the false identification documents, and the pattern of mysterious visitors all suggested something more significant than alcohol smuggling. Based on his knowledge of history and the political climate of the 1930s, Thomas began to suspect that Albert Harrington may have been involved in espionage activities, potentially gathering intelligence either for the United States government or, more disturbingly, for a foreign power. This theory gained additional support when James made a discovery while examining the wooden paneling of the hidden room. In the northwest corner, one panel appeared slightly different from the others. Upon careful inspection, he found it could be removed, revealing a small cache containing several film canisters and a miniature camera of German manufacture. According to James's journal, the camera was an engineering marvel of compact design, clearly intended for surreptitious photography of documents or objects. The film canisters presented a new challenge. Thomas, hesitant to attempt developing the potentially decades-old film himself, reached out to a former colleague with expertise in photography. This individual, whose name was recorded only as Professor H., in Thomas's notes, agreed to process the film discreetly. The results, delivered in a sealed envelope on December 12th, confirmed Thomas's espionage theory. The photographs showed pages of what appeared to be military documents, technical diagrams of aircraft and naval vessels, and several images of handwritten notes in German. Professor H. Gies, who had served in military intelligence during the Great War, identified several of the documents as relating to U.S. defense capabilities and armament specifications from the early 1930s, information that would have been highly classified at that time. The implications of this discovery were profound. If Albert Harrington had indeed been photographing and transmitting sensitive military information to a foreign power during the interwar period, he had committed treason of the highest order. Thomas found himself in an ethical quandary. Should he report these findings to authorities, even though the activities had apparently ceased years earlier and the perpetrator was no longer in residence? Before making this decision, Thomas decided to search for any connection between Albert Harrington and Walter Jenkins, the mysteriously departed caretaker. Town employment records revealed that Jenkins had begun working for Harrington in 1922, shortly after Harrington purchased the house. More significantly, Jenkins had previously been employed as a radio operator in the U.S. Navy during the Great War, giving him the technical expertise necessary to operate the sophisticated equipment found in the hidden room. On December 17th, a development occurred that shifted the investigation dramatically. A letter arrived for Thomas, postmarked from a small town in Vermont, with no return address. Inside was a brief, typewritten message. Professor Merritt, I understand you have taken an interest in the previous occupant of your home. Some matters are best left unexplored. For your family's safety and peace of mind, I strongly advise sealing the room as you found it and forgetting what you've discovered. There are forces at work that you cannot comprehend, with interests that transcend individual concerns. The letter was unsigned, but Thomas believed it had come from Walter Jenkins. Its arrival coincided with Eleanor reporting a disturbing incident while alone in the house that afternoon. She had heard what sounded like footsteps in the upstairs hallway, though upon investigation no one was there. She also noticed that Thomas's study appeared to have been searched, with papers slightly rearranged and desk drawers left partially open, though nothing seemed to be missing. This apparent intrusion, coupled with the threatening letter, caused Thomas to reconsider his approach. Concerned for his family's safety, he gathered all the materials from the hidden room, the notebooks, ledgers, film, and camera, and secured them in his office at the college. He then instructed James to help him reseal the opening to the hidden room with fresh mortar and replacement stones, effectively concealing it once again. According to James's journal, they completed this task on December 20th, working through the night to restore the basement wall to its previous appearance. For several days afterward, a tense calm descended on the Merritt household. Eleanor reported no further unusual occurrences, and Thomas temporarily suspended his investigation to focus on family matters during the holiday season. James, scheduled to return to his studies in early January, spent these quiet days transcribing relevant information from the documents his father had secured at the college, creating a comprehensive record of their findings. This period of calm was shattered on the evening of December 27th. According to the local newspaper account, a fire broke out in Thomas's office at the college, destroying the entire contents of the room. The official report attributed the blaze to faulty electrical wiring, but Thomas suspected a deliberate act of arson meant to destroy the evidence he had gathered. This suspicion was reinforced when he discovered that the building's night watchman had been inexplicably absent during the time the fire started, having been called away by an anonymous telephone message reporting suspicious activity on another part of campus. The loss of the physical evidence left Thomas with only the transcriptions James had made and their combined memories of what they had discovered. Increasingly concerned about surveillance, Thomas began keeping his remaining notes in code, using a system based on historical ciphers he had studied professionally. He also took to varying his routine, changing his routes to and from the college, and conducting sensitive conversations only while walking outdoors, away from potential eavesdropping. January 1939 brought a new development. While attending a faculty reception, Thomas was approached by a man who introduced himself as Richard Crawford from the State Department. Crawford requested a private meeting, during which he revealed that he was actually an agent with a government intelligence service monitoring potential foreign espionage activities. According to Thomas's coded notes, Crawford confirmed that Albert Harrington had indeed been under investigation during the 1930s for suspected espionage on behalf of Germany, though no charges had ever been filed due to insufficient evidence. Crawford expressed great interest in the hidden room and its contents, particularly the radio equipment and the photographs of military documents. He requested that Thomas cooperate fully with a discreet official investigation, including allowing specialized personnel to examine the sealed room. Thomas agreed, seeing an opportunity to resolve the mystery while ensuring his family's safety through official channels. On January 12th, Crawford arrived at the Merritt house accompanied by two technicians described as communications specialists. Thomas led them to the basement and revealed the location of the concealed room, which they reopened with professional tools. Over the next 6 hours, the technicians methodically examined every inch of the space, removing the radio equipment and taking numerous photographs and measurements. Crawford himself spent considerable time reviewing the walls and floor, as if searching for additional hidden compartments. Before departing, Crawford informed Thomas that the investigation was now a matter of national security, requiring absolute discretion. He provided Thomas with a contact number for emergencies, but instructed him not to discuss their meeting or the hidden room with anyone outside his immediate family. The technicians resealed the opening to the room, this time using materials that matched the original wall so perfectly that the entry point was virtually undetectable. For several weeks afterward, life in the Merritt household returned to a semblance of normality. Thomas resumed his teaching duties, Eleanor became more involved in local women's organizations, and James prepared to depart for his delayed return to college. The hidden room, while not forgotten, receded from their immediate concerns as the official investigation presumably continued through proper channels. This period of calm ended abruptly on February 3rd, when Thomas received a telephone call from a man identifying himself as Agent Crawford's supervisor. The caller requested an urgent meeting that evening at a local restaurant to discuss critical developments in the investigation. Thomas, sensing something amiss about the call, telephoned the contact number Crawford had provided, only to be informed that Crawford was out of the country on assignment and had been for the past week. Furthermore, he had no supervisor who would be making such a call. Alarmed by this attempted deception, Thomas immediately returned home and informed his family of the situation. Fearing their safety might be compromised, he made arrangements for Eleanor to stay with her sister in Springfield while he and James remained to address any further developments. Eleanor departed that afternoon, taking only essential belongings and promising to maintain regular telephone contact. That night, Thomas and James took turns keeping watch, anticipating possible unwelcome visitors. According to James's journal, at approximately 2:15 in the morning, they observed a dark sedan driving slowly past the house 3 times before parking around the corner. Shortly thereafter, they heard what sounded like someone attempting to force the rear kitchen door. Thomas immediately telephoned the local police, who responded within minutes, but the intruders had already fled upon hearing the approaching police siren. The responding officers found evidence of an attempted break-in, tool marks on the doorframe, and a set of footprints in the light snow leading from the back door across the yard to the adjacent street. A report was filed, but without a clear description of the perpetrators. Little could be done beyond increasing patrols in the neighborhood for the next several nights. 2 days later, Thomas received a telegram from the real Agent Crawford, who had returned from his overseas assignment. The message requested Thomas come to Boston immediately to discuss a matter of urgent importance related to their previous meeting. Cautious after the recent events, Thomas arranged to meet Crawford in a public location, the main reading room of the Boston Public Library, with James positioned nearby as a precautionary observer. At this meeting, documented in Thomas's coded notes recovered years later, Crawford revealed alarming information. The technical analysis of the radio equipment from the hidden room had confirmed it was of German design, specifically a model used by German intelligence operatives in the early to mid-1930s. More significantly, recent intelligence had uncovered evidence that Albert Harrington had not been working alone, but was part of a network of agents that might still be operational. Most disturbing was Crawford's revelation that Walter Jenkins, far from being a simple caretaker, was believed to be a key figure in this network, possibly even more senior than Harrington himself. Intelligence reports indicated Jenkins had not fled out of fear of discovery, but had likely gone underground to protect the network's operations. Crawford warned that Thomas and his family might be in danger, not because of what they had found, but because their discovery threatened to expose a dormant espionage cell that could be reactivated as tensions in Europe escalated toward another potential conflict. Crawford offered Thomas and his family protective relocation through an official program, but Thomas declined, unwilling to abandon his career and community based on what still seemed like a remote threat. Instead, he accepted enhanced security measures, including regular police patrols past his home and a direct line to contact Crawford in case of emergency. James, however, was persuaded to return to college as scheduled, where his routine and public presence would make him a less vulnerable target. The weeks that followed brought a strange combination of tension and mundanity to Thomas's life. Eleanor returned home after the security measures were implemented, and their daily routines resumed. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a constant vigilance, Curtains checked for signs of surveillance, unfamiliar vehicles noted, telephone conversations kept deliberately vague. The hidden room, sealed once more behind the basement wall, remained a physical reminder of the secrets that had invaded their lives. In early March, a small article appeared in the Boston Globe reporting the death of Albert Harrington in Washington, D.C., apparently from natural causes. Thomas immediately contacted Crawford, who confirmed that Harrington had died of an apparent heart attack in his apartment, though the timing, just as investigators were closing in on his former activities, raised questions about whether his death had truly been natural. This news heightened Thomas's concern about potential reprisals from Harrington's associates. In a letter to James at college, he wrote, "Recent developments suggest that the web we have inadvertently disturbed extends further and reaches higher than we initially imagined. While I have no regrets about bringing these matters to light, I am increasingly aware that knowledge carries its own burden. Be vigilant, but do not allow fear to overshadow your studies. Some battles must be fought simply by continuing to live one's life with purpose and integrity." On March 17th, Thomas received a small package in the mail containing a newspaper clipping from a Vermont local paper reporting the discovery of an unidentified man's body in a remote wooded area. The article noted that the deceased carried no identification but was estimated to be in his 50s, with a distinctive scar on his right hand, a detail that matched Walter Jenkins's appearance. Accompanying the clipping was a note card bearing only the typed message. "The matter is concluded. You need not concern yourself further." There was no signature or return address. Thomas shared this development with Agent Crawford, who arranged for verification through local authorities in Vermont. The body was indeed identified as Walter Jenkins, with the cause of death determined to be exposure to the elements. However, Crawford confided to Thomas that certain inconsistencies in the autopsy report suggested Jenkins's death might not have been accidental or due to natural causes. The implications were clear. Someone had eliminated Jenkins, potentially to silence him or as punishment for the exposure of the espionage network. This revelation created a moral dilemma for Thomas. Had his discovery of the hidden room and subsequent investigation inadvertently led to Jenkins's death? While Jenkins had apparently been involved in treasonous activities, Thomas had never intended for his inquiry to result in fatal consequences. This ethical burden weighed heavily on him in the weeks that followed, manifesting in disturbed sleep and increasing withdrawal from social engagements. Eleanor, noting her husband's deteriorating mental state, insisted they consider selling the house and relocating, perhaps to join James near his college or to start fresh in a different community altogether. Thomas, however, felt compelled to remain, driven by a combination of academic stubbornness and a sense that departing would somehow represent a concession to the fears that had invaded their lives. By April, the immediate sense of danger had receded. No further suspicious activities occurred around the Merritt home, and Crawford reported that the investigation into the espionage network had shifted to other locations and suspects. The hidden room, sealed behind the basement wall, became less a source of active concern and more a subdued reminder of the house's complicated history. Yet subtle changes had permanently altered the Merritt family's relationship with their home. Eleanor refused to enter the basement alone, citing a persistent sense of being watched whenever she descended the stairs. Thomas, while rationally dismissive of such notions, nevertheless developed the habit of double-checking the basement wall where the entrance to the hidden room had been, assuring himself that it remained sealed. Even James, upon returning for a weekend visit in late April, commented in his journal about the palpable tension that seems to have seeped into the very structure of the house, as if the walls themselves have absorbed the secrets they concealed. As spring progressed into summer, these psychological effects began to diminish. The rhythms of academic life, social obligations, and household maintenance gradually reasserted their normalcy. Thomas redirected his scholarly interests away from contemporary history to safer topics in colonial American studies. Eleanor became involved in gardening, transforming the somewhat neglected grounds into a vibrant display of flowers and vegetables that earned compliments from neighbors and passers-by. In July, the Merritts hosted a modest Independence Day gathering, inviting several of Thomas's colleagues and their families for an afternoon of conversation and refreshments. According to Eleanor's correspondence with her sister, the event proceeded pleasantly until one guest, after several glasses of punch, mentioned having known Albert Harrington through banking circles. The guest described Harrington as a patriot of the highest order who had performed invaluable services for his country that would never be publicly acknowledged. This unexpected characterization conflicted dramatically with the evidence Thomas had discovered, suggesting either that Harrington had successfully maintained a dual identity, even among his professional acquaintances, or that the narrative Thomas had constructed about Harrington's activities was incomplete or incorrect. This alternative perspective rekindled Thomas's intellectual curiosity about the former owner and the true purpose of the hidden room. In August, Thomas cautiously resumed his investigation, this time focusing on Harrington's legitimate professional activities rather than his suspected espionage. Through banking industry publications and financial records, he traced Harrington's career from a junior accountant in 1910 to a senior position with a prestigious Boston investment firm by 1920, followed by his establishment of a private banking consultancy in 1928 that specialized in international finance. Most intriguing was the discovery that Harrington had made frequent trips to Switzerland and Sweden between 1932 and 1938, neutral countries that served as financial havens and diplomatic intermediaries during the increasingly tense European political climate. These travels coincided with periods when, according to the documents found in the hidden room, the most active communications appeared to have taken place. A new theory began to form in Thomas's mind. Perhaps Harrington had indeed been working for U.S. interests rather than against them. His banking expertise, international connections, and the sophisticated communications equipment might have served an intelligence-gathering function, benefiting American security rather than undermining it. This would explain the guest's characterization of Harrington as a patriot, while also accounting for the clandestine nature of his activities. Thomas shared this revised theory with Crawford during a telephone conversation in late August. The agent neither confirmed nor denied the possibility, stating only that history is rarely as straightforward as we would like it to be, and those who operate in the shadows often leave conflicting trails by necessity. He advised Thomas to consider the matter closed, regardless of which interpretation was correct, as the geopolitical landscape had shifted significantly with the escalating conflicts in Europe. By September 1939, as news of Germany's invasion of Poland marked the official beginning of hostilities in Europe, the mysteries of the hidden room took on a different significance for the Merritts. What had been a disturbing discovery about the past now seemed connected to the unfolding global drama. Thomas found himself wondering whether the intelligence gathered or transmitted from his basement, whether by a traitor or a patriot, had played some small role in the complex international chess game that had culminated in another world war. Eleanor, pragmatic as always, focused on the immediate implications. "If there is to be another war," she wrote to her sister, "I suspect houses all across America will develop their own secrets. Every home becomes a fortress of sorts during such times, and what was hidden in our basement may soon be mirrored in countless other ways as people adapt to uncertainty and fear." As autumn returned to Hastings Mills, bringing with it the anniversary of the Merritts' move to 17 Willow Street, the family had achieved a fragile peace with their home's hidden history. The sealed room remained sealed, its secrets partially uncovered but never fully resolved. Thomas had preserved his transcriptions and notes about their discoveries, securing them in a safe deposit box at the local bank with instructions that they not be opened until after his death. In October, a letter arrived for Thomas from an unfamiliar address in Washington, D.C. Inside was a brief handwritten note that read simply, "Professor Merritt, some rooms remain hidden, not to conceal darkness, but to protect light. What you found was one segment of a necessary shadow that allowed truth to prevail in its time. May your home bring you the peace it helped secure for others." The note was signed with the initials A.H. in a handwriting that, when compared to the ledgers from the hidden room, appeared to match Albert Harrington's, despite his reported death 7 months earlier. Thomas shared this perplexing communication with no one, not even Eleanor or James. He carefully placed it within the pages of his personal diary, where it would remain undiscovered until 1946, when a researcher examining his papers for a posthumous biography found it tucked between entries from October 1939. Thomas himself never publicly commented on the letter or its implications for the true identity and fate of Albert Harrington. The Merritt family continued to live at 17 Willow Street until 1943, when Thomas accepted a position at a university in California, believing the milder climate would benefit Eleanor's increasingly troublesome arthritis. The house was sold to a young doctor and his family, who were told nothing of the hidden room or its contents. Whether they ever discovered the sealed chamber remains unrecorded in any available documents. James Merritt, after completing his education and serving briefly in the war effort as a communications specialist, became a historian like his father, with a particular interest in the role of intelligence operations in shaping 20th century events. In a scholarly article published in 1968, he made oblique reference to domestic installations that served as critical nodes in a largely undocumented intelligence network operating throughout the interwar period, though he never explicitly connected this network to his family's experience in Hastings Mills. Eleanor Merritt lived until 1965, surviving her husband by nearly a decade. In her final years, she occasionally spoke to family members about the strange months following their discovery in the basement, describing it as a time when the line between security and paranoia became as thin as a shadow. She maintained until her death that she sometimes heard the faint sound of radio static emanating from behind the basement wall, though no one else ever confirmed this experience. The house at 17 Willow Street still stands in Hastings Mills, its colonial revival architecture a dignified presence on a street now lined with more modern homes. Over the decades, it has passed through several owners, none of whom have reported finding anything unusual about the basement, or if they have, they've chosen to keep their discoveries as private as Albert Harrington did his. A historical marker installed near the town square in 1987 makes no mention of 17 Willow Street or its possible connection to wartime intelligence activities. It does, however, note that Hastings Mills contributed to America's security in ways both public and private during the crucial years before and during World War II, an ambiguous acknowledgement that leaves room for untold stories. Local folklore has occasionally connected the Merritt house to various rumors, strange lights seen in the windows during the war years, unexplained radio interference affecting nearby homes, visitors arriving at unusual hours. These tales, embellished over time, bear little resemblance to the documented events of 1938 and 39, but they speak to the persistent human fascination with hidden spaces and the secrets they might contain. The actual hidden room, if it remains intact behind its sealed entrance, has kept its silence for over 80 years, whatever purpose it truly served, whether as an outpost of foreign espionage, a node in a domestic intelligence network, or something else entirely, has been largely lost to history, preserved only in fragmented documents and fading memories. What endures is the fundamental truth that Thomas Merritt discovered. Our homes contain more than we know. Behind their walls lie not just the physical spaces we can see and touch, but the invisible imprints of those who came before, their fears and hopes, their secrets and sacrifices, their contributions to histories both personal and profound. Sometimes these hidden dimensions reveal themselves, briefly and partially, before receding again into the shadows that preserve them. In 1948, Thomas Merritt published what would be his final academic work, a study of architectural adaptations in New England homes during periods of national crisis. In the preface, he wrote, "The houses we inhabit are never simply structures of wood and stone, but repositories of human experience layered through time. They conceal as much as they reveal, protect as much as they expose. In their hidden corners and forgotten spaces, we may sometimes glimpse the shadows of greater stories than our own, reminders that we are but temporary custodians of places that will outlast us, carrying their secrets forward into futures we cannot imagine." The hidden room at 17 Willow Street, whether still intact or long since dismantled, stands as testament to this observation, a space that existed outside the apparent dimensions of the house, concealing activities that rippled beyond the boundaries of a single family's experience. Its discovery by the Merritts opened a brief window into these hidden dimensions before closing again, leaving behind questions that echo still in the spaces between what we know and what remains concealed. In the final analysis, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Merritt family's experience was not what they found behind the basement wall, but the realization that such hidden dimensions exist in all our lives, spaces just beyond our perception where other narratives unfold, affecting us in ways we may never fully comprehend. The true horror lies not in the darkness of such concealed spaces, but in the recognition that our sense of security and understanding is built upon foundations more provisional and penetrable than we care to acknowledge. As James Merritt wrote in the last entry of his journal before leaving for college in January 1939, "What troubles me most is not what we found in that impossible room, but what it suggests about all rooms, that their boundaries are more permeable than solid, more assumed than absolute. If one wall can conceal an entire chamber of secrets, what certainty can we have about any of the structures that frame our lives? The hidden room has been sealed again, but the question it posed remains open, like a door that can never truly be closed." Fin de la narración.